They say a man's life can change in a single moment. For Eli Turner, a rancher with nothing left but dust and debt, that moment came on a moonless night in Deadwood. He rode into town seeking a miracle and rode out with a curse. Or so he thought. Beside him on the wagon sat his winnings, a 13-year-old girl with eyes like a cornered wolf. He didn't know her name, nor the dangerous secrets she carried. He only knew that he had gambled his soul in a smoky saloon, and now, the fate of his land, his wife, and the rest of his life rested on the shoulders of this silent, defiant child. The swinging doors of the Lucky Coin Saloon burst open, and Eli Turner stepped out of the muddy darkness into the hazy, yellow light. The noise hit him first, a wall of rowdy laughter, clinking glasses, and a piano playing a tune that had been broken for years. He wasn't here for the cheap whiskey or the company of broken men. He was here because the land had turned its back on him. The drought had scorched his pastures to a crisp, and the faces of his starving cattle were a constant, silent accusation. Desperation had a taste, and it was the dust coating the back of his throat. His eyes scanned the smoke-filled room and found him. Clay Rourke. He sat behind a pile of chips, a silk-vested snake in a den of coyotes. His smile was all polish and poison. Rourke spotted him, and that smile widened. "Well, look what the wind blew in. Eli Turner. I'd heard your luck had run as dry as your creek bed." Eli walked to the table, his face a mask of stone. "Rourke. I figured you'd be warming a jail cell by now. Or a pine box." Rourke let out a slick, hollow laugh. "This town is full of second chances. Care to try for one of your own? High stakes tonight." The wager was $500. A fortune Eli no longer had. But the thought of his wife Rosaline's face, her quiet strength beginning to fray, kept him rooted to the spot. "I don't have that cash, Rourke," Eli said, his voice flat. "Ah, but a man always has something of value." Rourke snapped his fingers. One of his men pushed a figure out of the shadows. A girl, no older than 13, bone-thin and draped in rags. But it was her eyes that silenced the air around the table. They weren't a child's eyes. They were old and sharp, like a cornered wolf sizing up the hunter, burning with a defiant fire. "This is Clara," Rourke announced. "Collateral. Win the pot, she's yours. Lose. And you walk out with nothing." A wave of sickness rolled through Eli. But the image of his failing ranch, of losing everything, drowned out his better judgment. He looked at the girl. Her chin was up. Those wolf eyes met his. His voice was a rasp. "Deal the cards." The room hushed. The hand played out in a blur of smoke and tension. Rourke laid down a straight with a victorious grin. Eli laid his cards on the table. Full house. The smile vanished from Rourke's face. The pot was pushed toward Eli. And the girl. She took a step forward, her expression a blank slate. Eli raked in the meager winnings and stood, his body aching. "Let's go, kid." As they walked into the cold night, Eli knew he hadn't truly won anything. He had just made the most dangerous wager of his life, and the real stakes had yet to be counted. The wagon wheels groaned as they rolled west, away from the flickering lights of Deadwood. The silence between them was as wide and empty as the land itself. Beside Eli sat the girl, Clarabel. She was small, wiry, nothing but elbows and suspicion wrapped in threadbare clothes. He'd given her his old canvas duster, but it hung off her tiny frame like a tarp on a fence post. She sat with her back straight, eyes fixed on the horizon. Those were wolf eyes, Eli thought again. Eyes that didn't miss a thing. After nearly an hour, Eli finally broke the quiet, his voice rough. "You always this quiet?" The girl's gaze didn't move. "Depends," she said. "On whether a man's worth talking to." A dry chuckle escaped Eli's lips. "Fair enough." The silence settled again, broken only by the clop of hooves and the creak of wagon wood. He tried again. "You worked for Rourke?" Her eyes flicked toward him for a second, unreadable. "I worked near him. Never for him." "Same difference, far as I see it." "Not to me," she said, her voice flat and controlled. Too old for her years. Eli recognized that tone. He'd heard it on the lips of men and women who'd been chewed up by the world and spat back out. You owed him money? A bitter little smile touched her lips. Caught me stealing bread. He could have taken my hand for it. He likes lessons like that. Offered me a deal instead. Run messages, watch doors. Stay quiet. Eli's stomach nodded. Rourke always did like to make examples out of people. So why'd he stake you in a card game? The girl's jaw tightened. Because I stopped being useful. And because men like him. They like reminding folks you can always fall lower. Eli fell quiet. The wind whistled through the wagon spokes. After a long moment, he asked, You hungry? She just shrugged. Ate yesterday. Maybe. Well, Eli said, his gaze softening just a little. Rosaline will see you fed. She don't abide skinny folks in her house. For the briefest of moments, a flicker of something crossed the girl's face, doubt, maybe even a sliver of hope. But it was gone as fast as it appeared, replaced by that same guarded, wolfish stare. They crested a rise, and the land opened up below them. Silver Creek Ranch. The main house stood weathered but proud. A barn leaned slightly to one side, and the fences sagged. The few remaining cows grazed listlessly, their ribs showing. It wasn't much, but it was home. As he reined in the horses, Clara surveyed the place with a cool, calculating eye. Looks half dead. Ain't wrong, Eli admitted. But it's ours. The front door swung open. Rosaline Turner appeared on the porch, her arms folded across her chest, a gesture that was both defensive and weary. Her eyes locked onto Clara immediately. Eli Turner, she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. What in God's name? This is Clarabel, Eli cut in, climbing down from the wagon. She's. Help. Help? Rosaline's gaze didn't waver. She's a child. Child or not, she's sharp. We could use the hands. Eli trailed off, unsure how to explain the desperation, the poker game, the girl with the wolf eyes. Inside, the house was warm, the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and old coffee. Eli watched from the doorway as Rosaline wordlessly began to heat soup on the stove. Clara hovered awkwardly by the table, her eyes never still, always aimed toward the door, ready to run. Ain't nobody here going to hurt you, Rosaline said gently, catching the girl's weary glance. Clara's mouth tightened, but she gave a single, small nod. Eli leaned against the doorframe, watching the two of them. He wasn't sure what exactly he'd brought home from Deadwood. But seeing the stubborn tilt of Clara's chin, the haunted glint in her eyes, and the way Rosaline's frown softened despite herself, he had a feeling things at Silver Creek Ranch were about to change. Somewhere, back in the shadows of Deadwood, he knew Clay Rourke hadn't forgotten them. The girl with wolf eyes was his problem now. And likely his salvation. Or his ruin. 3 weeks passed. Life on Silver Creek Ranch settled into a fragile rhythm. Clarabel worked harder than Eli ever expected. She rose before the sun, her small hands learning the hard language of ranch work. And Rosaline, in her quiet way, began to thaw, teaching the girl how to bake bread and mend the constant tears in Eli's shirts. But underneath the small victories, an unease lingered like smoke after gunfire. It started with tracks. Eli found them one morning down by the creek. Horse prints, fresh. Too fresh. Not theirs, and no neighbors had reason to ride this far off the main trail. He tried to dismiss it. But the feeling in his gut, the same one that kept him alive through saloon brawls and card game betrayals, told him otherwise. The second sign came 2 days later. Clara was tending the small vegetable patch when she froze, her eyes narrowed toward the eastern hills. Eli, fixing a corral fence, saw the change in her posture. The stiffness. The way her hand drifted toward the little pocketknife on her belt. You see something? He called out. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze remained locked on the ridge for a long moment before she finally shook her head. Nothing, she said. Just thought I saw a glint. Like sunlight off glass. A spyglass. Eli's blood ran cold. That night, he sat them down at the kitchen table, the lantern casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. "Someone's watching the ranch," he said plainly, his fingers tapping the rim of his coffee cup. "And they ain't neighbors." Rosaline's face went pale. "Rourke." Eli's gaze settled on Clarabel. "If you know something," he said, his voice low and steady, "now's the time to talk." For the first time since she'd arrived, Clara's composure cracked. She fiddled with the frayed edge of her sleeve, her eyes darting toward the dark window, as if expecting shadows to materialize. Her voice was barely a whisper. I wasn't just a runner for Rourke." "Handled what?" Eli pressed. She took a slow, shaky breath. "His books. His ledgers. I kept track of who owed him what. Where the money went. Even who the law looked the other way for." Rosaline's eyes widened in disbelief. You were his accountant?" Clara's lips curled with a bitter amusement. "Don't need to be grown to count crooked money, ma'am." Eli leaned forward. "You steal something from him before you left?" She hesitated, then reached into her boot, pulling out a small, leather-bound ledger. The edges were frayed, the binding loose. She placed it on the table. The sound it made was small, but it landed with the weight of a gravestone. "Ain't just numbers in here," she explained, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. "Names. Dates. Payoffs. Town marshals, judges. Maybe even a few Pinkertons." Rosaline covered her mouth with her hand. Eli's mind raced. This wasn't some petty street scuffle. Rourke was entrenched, protected. And if he wanted that book back this badly, things were about to get ugly. "We can take this to the sheriff," Rosaline suggested, though her voice wavered with doubt. Eli shook his head. "Sheriff Dobbins. His name's probably in here, too. We can't trust anyone from town." "So, what do we do?" Clara asked quietly. Eli met her gaze, the weight of his decision settling heavy on his shoulders. "We get ready." That night, Eli retrieved his old Winchester rifle from the barn loft. The stock was scratched, the barrel worn, but it still fired true. In the low light of the kitchen, Clara helped him clean it, her small hands surprisingly deft with the oilcloth and tools. "You ever shoot?" Eli asked her. She hesitated, then nodded. "Rats mostly. In Deadwood." Eli gave a short, humorless snort. "Rats or men? Pulling the trigger's the same. It's what comes after that's hard." She didn't reply, but the look in her eyes told him she understood far too well. By morning, the fences were tightened and the barn doors reinforced. Eli posted himself on the porch, rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the tree line. The shadows of Deadwood stretched long, even out here in the hills. And Eli Turner, gambler turned rancher, knew one thing for certain. The bet he'd made in that smoky saloon wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. The first shot woke him. Eli Turner was out of bed before his boots hit the floor, his hand already reaching for the Winchester propped against the nightstand. Across the room, Rosaline bolted upright, her eyes wide with a fear he knew all too well. A second shot cracked through the pre-dawn gloom, followed by the distant thunder of hooves. "Stay with Clara," Eli ordered, already pulling on his shirt. Rosaline's face was pale, but her chin was set with determination. "Be careful," was all she said. By the time Eli reached the porch, rifle in hand, Clara was already there. She stood barefoot in the cold dirt, her small frame tense. A rifle, one of Eli's older repeaters, rested in her hands. Her grip was steady, her stance low and ready. Her eyes were locked on the eastern ridge, where dust rose against the pale morning sky. "They're here," she said simply. Eli followed her gaze. 6 riders, silhouettes against the growing dawn. At their head rode a man Eli recognized instantly, even from a distance. Jake Mallory, Rourke's lapdog. Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as dumb, but dangerous all the same. "Stay low," Eli told Clara. "And keep your head." "I ain't running," she replied, her voice fierce. Eli's stomach twisted with both pride and fear. The kid had backbone, no question. But backbone didn't stop bullets. The riders slowed as they reached the front gate. Jake Mallory lifted a hand, his voice rough as gravel. "Turner. We come for the girl. Hand her over, and nobody's got to bleed." Eli stepped off the porch, his rifle resting casually at his side. His heart pounded, but his voice stayed calm and even. "You picked the wrong ranch to trespass on, Jake." Mallory's yellow teeth flashed in a grin. "Don't matter. You got something belongs to Mr. Rourke. We aim to take it back." Without another word, Mallory's hand dropped to his belt. The world exploded in gunfire. Eli raised the Winchester in one smooth motion as a bullet slammed into the dirt near his feet. Clara's rifle cracked in response, splintering the fence post beside Jake's horse, sending the animal rearing. The raiders scattered, gunfire erupting like a summer hailstorm. Eli dove behind the water trough, bullets chewing into the porch rail where he'd just been standing. From an upstairs window, a shotgun blast rang out. "Rosaline." The battle was chaos. Smoke and dust swirled in the still morning air. Eli sprinted behind the wagon for cover, dropping one of the flanking riders with a clean shot to the shoulder. The man crumpled, cursing. Another rider charged the house, firing wildly. Clara's second shot found him square in the chest. The man tumbled from his saddle, hitting the dirt with a bone-snapping thud. But there were too many of them. Rourke never sent half measures. A shout from Jake broke through the gunfire. "Enough wasting time. Burn 'em out." Eli's blood ran cold. He saw one of the riders toss a bottle, a rag stuffed in its neck, flame licking the top. A Molotov. "Clara!" "Inside," Eli shouted. But before the bottle could fly, the sharp crack of a distant rifle split the air. The rider's hand exploded in a spray of red. The bottle dropped harmlessly to the ground, its flame sputtering in the dirt. Eli's head snapped toward the hilltop. Silhouetted against the ridge stood a figure. Tom Bradley, his old friend, his rifle steady. And beside him, 3 more men appeared. Neighboring ranchers. Friends. Jake Mallory saw them, too. He cursed, yanking his horse around. "We ain't done, Turner." The remaining raiders wheeled their mounts, disappearing back into the hills as quickly as they had come. For a long moment, silence returned to Silver Creek. Smoke drifted from the porch rail. Bullet holes pocked the barn siding. The faint tang of gunpowder clung to the air. Eli lowered his rifle, his shoulders tight with exhaustion. Clara appeared at his side, her face pale but her eyes steady. "They'll be back," she said simply. Eli nodded. "Yeah. But so will we." The morning after the raid, the sun rose slow and crimson, casting long shadows across the battered ranch. Smoke still curled from the splintered porch rail, and the muddy ground was scarred with fresh hoof prints. Eli Turner stood at the fence line, arms crossed. His old friend, Tom Bradley, leaned beside him, reloading his rifle. "Rourke ain't done," Tom remarked, his voice low. "No," Eli agreed. "He sent Mallory first. Next time it'll be worse." Eli's gut twisted. He couldn't outrun Rourke. Couldn't hide Clara forever. But maybe, just maybe, he could outplay him. That evening, as the stars bled across the Dakota sky, Eli called Clara into the kitchen. The lantern light flickered across the worn wood table. Rosaline stood by the stove, her hands twisting a dish rag. "I'm going to town," Eli said simply. Clara's eyes narrowed. "Deadwood?" Eli nodded. "You still got that little book?" She reached into her boot, pulling the leather-bound ledger free. "You going to trade it?" "Not exactly," Eli said, sliding the book into his coat pocket. "I'm making a deal. With the devil himself. But on my terms." An hour later, under the cover of darkness, Eli saddled his horse and rode into the hills. The only sounds were the distant howl of coyotes and the steady rhythm of hooves on dry earth. As the town's flickering lights came into view, Eli's pulse quickened. He hadn't set foot in Deadwood since that cursed card game. Now, he was riding straight back into the snake pit. The Lucky Coin Saloon was as grimy and crowded as ever. Rourke sat at his usual corner table, flanked by hired guns. His grin stretched wide when he saw Eli. Well, Turner returns. Thought you'd be buried on that ranch by now. Eli approached slowly, his face a neutral mask. I ain't here to trade shots, Rourke, Eli said, his voice calm. I'm here to trade terms. Rourke chuckled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. What makes you think you got any? Eli pulled the ledger from his coat, setting it on the table. It made a soft thud that echoed louder than a gunshot in the tense silence. Rourke's eyes narrowed, his easy grin faltering. That book's got names, Eli explained. Dates, amounts, payoffs. Enough to burn you clean off the map, far as the Pinkertons and circuit judges are concerned. Rourke's smile returned, but it was colder this time. You'd be dead before that book ever left town. Maybe, Eli allowed. But copies travel faster than bullets. A tense beat passed. Finally, Rourke leaned back, his eyes gleaming with calculation. What do you want? You call off your dogs, Eli said. You leave me, my wife, and the girl be. You tell your boys Clarabel is dead, buried under 6 feet of Dakota clay. And you never so much as breathe our names again. Rourke tapped the rim of his glass, considering. And in return, Eli continued, pushing the ledger toward him, you get your book. No copies, no threats. You keep your empire. I keep my family. The saloon seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Rourke snatched the ledger, thumbing through its pages. His jaw tightened at the names, the details, the evidence that could ruin him. You always were a gambling man, Turner, Rourke mused. Dangerous game you're playing. Ain't much of a life without risk. Another long pause. Then Rourke snapped the ledger shut. Done. Eli nodded once, though the knot in his stomach didn't ease. As he turned to leave, Rourke called after him. You ever cross me again, Turner? Ledger or no ledger. I'll burn that ranch to the ground with you in it. Eli didn't flinch. You ever ride near my land again, Rourke? You won't ride back. With that, Eli strode from the saloon and mounted his horse beneath the cold, watchful moon. The deal was struck. The girl was safe, for now. But as the shadows of Deadwood faded behind him, Eli knew better than to believe devils kept their word for long. It was raining the night Eli returned from Deadwood. A slow, steady drizzle that soaked the dry ground and filled the air with the clean scent of wet earth. Rosaline met him on the porch, arms folded, her eyes sharp with questions. Clara lingered in the doorway behind her, a small silhouette in the flickering lamplight. Eli dismounted, mud clinging to his boots as he approached. It's done, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He told them about the deal. The ledger. The promise. He met Rosaline's gaze. I told him Clara was dead. The girl's eyes flickered with something Eli couldn't quite name. Relief? Anger? Maybe all three. Rosaline's face softened with a quiet resolve. Then we make sure we're ready, she said. The following weeks passed without incident. No riders appeared on the ridge. No strange tracks by the creek. It was as if the storm had finally broken, leaving Silver Creek in peace. But the ranch had changed, and so had its people. Clarabel worked with a new fire. Her hands, once thin, grew calloused from mending fences and hauling water. Eli taught her how to rope and ride properly, and at night, Rosaline taught her to read and write better, their heads bent together over dog-eared books by the lantern's glow. The girl soaked it all up like dry soil after a long-awaited rain. The question came one warm evening as the sun bled orange across the hills. They were in the barn, the air thick with the smell of hay and saddle leather. Clara's voice broke the comfortable silence. Mr. Turner? Eli looked up from the bridle he was mending. Why'd you really gamble for me? Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, like she'd been holding the question in her gut for weeks. Eli set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag. He considered lying, saying it was pity, or duty. But the girl deserved the truth. I saw something in your eyes, Eli admitted, his voice quiet. I've been around long enough to recognize it. Fight. Anger. But something more. Something stubborn. You reminded me of me, I guess. And I knew if Rourke kept you, he'd grind that out of you until there was nothing left. So you bought me to save me. Eli shook his head. I won you. To give you a choice. Ain't nobody owns you here, Clara. Her eyes shimmered with something like belief for the first time. Her gaze drifted over the barn, the fields beyond, the cattle moving slow and steady in the twilight. Her expression shifted, resolve settling over her like armor. Mr. Turner, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I want to stay. Eli's brows furrowed. Not as charity, she pressed on, her small fists balled at her sides. Not as a hired hand. I want to be part of this. For real. Your family. Your legacy. I want to learn how to run this ranch, not just mend fences. The real work. The money, the land, the decisions. Eli's throat tightened. He looked at her thin arms and wolf eyes and stubborn chin, and he saw not a street rat or a burden, but a survivor. A fighter. His future. You sure? He asked softly. It ain't easy. I'm sure, she said, her jaw set with determination. I ain't got blood family left. But I can choose one. A slow smile spread across Eli's weathered face. Then it's settled, he said. We'll make it official. You're a Turner now. That night, around the supper table, Eli and Rosaline laid it all out. The adoption. The responsibilities. The future. Rosaline's eyes shone with quiet tears as she took Clara's hand in her own. You're not just a stray we took in, Rosaline promised, her voice thick with an emotion that had been buried for years. You're ours. Blood or no blood. For the first time, Clarabel didn't flinch from kindness. She simply held on tight. And under that rain-washed Dakota sky, Silver Creek Ranch gained more than another set of working hands. It gained family. It gained hope. It gained a fighter who would defend it with blood, sweat. And maybe, just maybe, with love. 5 years passed like a prairie storm, fast, fierce, and full of change. By the spring of 1890, Silver Creek Ranch was thriving. The fields were green, the cattle fat, and the barns stood straight and true. But the real transformation wasn't measured in livestock or land. It was measured in the children. The first was a boy named Daniel, who'd run from the mines after his father was killed in a cave-in. Eli found him sleeping in the hayloft, ready to drag him to town until Clara stopped him. He's me, she had said simply. 5 years ago. So Daniel stayed. Then came Ruth, a wiry girl with bruises hidden under her dress and eyes as sharp as broken glass. Then Thomas, who couldn't speak but could fix a fence better than most grown men. By 1890, a dozen children called Silver Creek home. And Clarabel Turner, now 18 years old, was their leader. She ran the ranch with steady hands and sharper eyes than Eli could have hoped for. She taught the younger ones how to mend fences and count cattle, but more importantly, how to trust again. Eli and Rosaline had built the ranch with sweat and stubbornness. But it was Clara who turned it into a sanctuary. One April morning, Eli found her down by the creek, teaching Daniel and Ruth how to rope calves. Her voice was patient but firm. He rested a hand on the fence. Rosaline and I, he began, his voice serious, we're not getting any younger. This ranch. It needs someone to run it when I can't. Clara's eyes widened. You talking about me? Eli nodded. You've earned it. You've bled for it. And these kids. They look up to you. She fell quiet, her gaze drifting over the ranch that was now her entire world. I thought, she hesitated, her voice lower, I thought when I turned 18, I might leave. See the world. But I don't know anymore. Ain't no chains holding you here, Eli said gently. Her jaw set with that old, familiar resolve. This place saved me. You and Rosaline did. If I can do that for someone else, maybe that's enough. A swell of pride rose in Eli's chest. "We're proud of you, kid," was all he said. By the spring of 1900, the story of Silver Creek was more than just whispers. It was a legend. The place where orphans became cowhands, where the lost found not just shelter, but purpose. One warm afternoon, a wagon rattled down the road, carrying 3 new arrivals. A boy of 12 with hollow cheeks, and 2 smaller children huddled in the back. Clara, now a woman of 28, stood on the front porch, her presence as calm and steady as the hills. Eli and Rosaline stood beside her, their hair now streaked with silver. Clara walked down the steps to greet them, her face kind but her eyes still holding that old, wolfish wisdom. The boy stared up at her with suspicion. The little girl peeked out from under a tattered blanket. We don't got nobody," she whispered. Clara knelt down, her voice soft but sure. "You do now." That evening, after the newcomers were washed and fed, Eli poured coffee for himself and Clara at the kitchen table. The sounds of laughter drifted in from the yard. 10 years ago, Eli began, swirling the cup in his hands, "I thought bringing you here was the biggest mistake of my life. Thought you'd break this place. Or we'd break you." A small, knowing smile touched Clara's lips. "Fair. But I was wrong," Eli continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved this ranch. Saved us." She looked at him, her eyes clear and steady. "You saved me first." Eli shook his head. "We gave you shelter. You turned it into a home." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the window, toward the legacy playing out under the prairie stars. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The deal?" "Rourke." "Not for a second," he said. His hand rested over hers, calloused and steady. "If he ever comes back, we'll be ready. Same as always." A knot of fear she didn't even know she still held finally loosened. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the ranch settle for the night. As the moon climbed higher, casting a silver light over the fields, Clara whispered words she hadn't spoken aloud in years. This is home." Eli squeezed her hand. "And you're the heart of it. 'Cause legends out here in the West ain't always carved by bullets and bloodshed. Sometimes, they're built by quiet hands, heavy hearts, and the grit to protect what matters most."